Sign those papers, or I'll make sure you leave here with nothing, not even my grandson. Blythe Redthorn's voice cut through the glass-walled reception hall, silencing nearly 100 guests.
Callie stood across from her mother-in-law beside the birthday table, one hand resting protectively on 7-year-old Eli's shoulder. Before she could answer, Blythe struck her across the face. The slap snapped Callie's head sideways and drew a collective gasp from the investors. Wedding clients and local reporters gathered inside Redthorn Estate. Eli screamed for his grandmother to stop, but Blythe had already seized the homemade honey cake from the table. With both hands, she drove it into Callie's face, crushing yellow frosting and sponge cake and sugar decorations against her skin, while everyone watched. For several seconds, Callie did not move. Honey-colored frosting slid from her hair onto the simple blue dress she had bought for her son's birthday. Gavin, her husband of 9 years, stood less than 6 feet away. Yet he made no attempt to defend her. His only concern was the folder of legal documents lying open beside the ruined cake. Behind Blythe, a phone mounted on a tripod continued recording, its small red light blinking. The event was still being streamed live through Redthorn Estate's social media account. Blythe believed she had humiliated an ordinary beekeeper into submission. She had no idea that her rage had just exposed the first crack in a secret that could destroy her land, her fortune, and her entire family. Before we uncover what really happened, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. 2 hours earlier, the estate had looked like something created for a glossy travel magazine. Redthorn Estate stretched across hundreds of acres outside Walla Walla, Washington, where straight rows of grapevines rolled toward low green hills beneath a cloudless June sky. A stone manor stood at the center of the property, surrounded by fountains, white roses, and terraces overlooking the vineyard. Guests arriving for Eli's birthday were greeted by uniformed servers carrying sparkling cider in crystal glasses. A string quartet played near the infinity pool, while photographers captured every polished detail. Blythe had promoted the celebration as an intimate family event, but Callie saw the banners displaying the Redthorn crest and the carefully positioned bottles of wine. This was not a birthday party. It was a sales presentation disguised with balloons. Callie entered through the kitchen carrying the cake she had stayed awake until nearly 3 that morning to finish. It was not professionally perfect, but every decoration had been made for Eli. The round cake resembled a beehive, with tiny fondant bees circling the top and a small beekeeper figure standing beside a boy in yellow boots. The cake was sweetened with honey from the last healthy hive on Callie's farm. Eli walked beside her, holding the box steady whenever she needed to open a door. "It looks better in the sunlight," he said proudly. Callie smiled, despite the exhaustion behind her eyes. During the past 3 months, she had lost almost half her bees, without knowing why. Making that cake from the season's final honey had felt like a promise that their little farm would survive. Callie's 18-acre property bordered the western edge of Redthorn Estate. Her father, Wesley Monroe, had kept bees there for more than 30 years, selling honey at farmers markets and teaching local children how pollination worked. When he died, he left the land to Callie with no mortgage and one repeated warning: never sign away its water access. No matter how harmless the paperwork appeared, Callie had not understood his concern at the time. The property included only a modest farmhouse, 2 weathered barns, and rows of wildflowers. Compared with the Redthorn's vineyard, it seemed nearly worthless. Blythe had offered to buy it 3 times since the wedding, describing it as an ugly patch that interrupted the estate's western view. Each time, Callie refused. It was the only place where she still felt close to her father. Gavin found them near the service entrance. At 35, he had the polished appearance expected of the Redthorn heir-tailored gray suit. expensive watch, and the calm expression he wore whenever investors were present. He glanced at the homemade cake and frowned. Mom ordered one from Bellamy's in Seattle. He said, "It cost almost $2,000. Eli immediately tightened his grip on Callie's hand. He had already seen the towering designer cake in the reception hall, decorated with gold leaves and the Redthorn family crest. "I don't want that one," he told his father. "Mine has Mom's honey." Gavin looked toward the hallway to make sure no guests had heard him. Then he lowered his voice and told Callie that today was important. A group of potential investors was considering financing the estate's new resort expansion, and the family needed everything to look refined. "Eli's birthday isn't an investor meeting," Callie replied. Gavin gave her the same strained smile he had been using for months, the one that made every disagreement sound like her failure to understand adult responsibilities. He explained that the vineyard had suffered through 2 bad harvests and that construction costs on the new hotel had increased. Callie had heard parts of this before, but Gavin always became vague when she asked how serious the problem was. Recently, he had started taking late-night calls outside and locking his laptop whenever she entered the room. He had also pressured her to combine their finances, insisting it would make their marriage stronger. Callie had refused because the bee farm had belonged to her before they met. Gavin had called her distrustful, but he had never explained why a wealthy family needed access to a small beekeeper's land. The dead bees had made Callie even more cautious. She first noticed them in March, scattered beneath the hives like dark grains of rice. Within weeks, whole colonies began collapsing. A state inspector suggested disease, cold weather, or pesticide exposure, but the laboratory results were delayed. When Callie asked Gavin whether the vineyard had changed its spraying program, he told her Redthorn Estate used only approved products. Blythe responded more harshly, accusing Callie of inventing a crisis to gain sympathy. Yet one night, Callie had awakened to the sound of machinery beyond her western fence. Through her bedroom window, she saw headlights moving between the grapevines and men wearing protective masks beside a spraying truck. By morning, the air carried a bitter metallic smell, and another hive had gone silent. Gavin led Callie into the manor's private study before the cake ceremony. Blythe was waiting behind a walnut desk with Sienna, Gavin's older sister, and the estate's marketing director. A cream-colored folder lay beside 3 glasses of champagne. Blythe wore an ivory suit and a diamond brooch shaped like a grapevine. She did not mention the bees or wish Eli a happy birthday. Instead, she pushed the folder toward Callie and said the family needed a small favor. According to Blythe, the estate's bank required written permission to install a temporary irrigation line beneath one corner of Callie's property. In return, Redthorn Estate would repair her barn roof and cover Eli's private school tuition for the next 5 years. Sienna raised her champagne glass as though the agreement had already been settled. Callie remained standing while she read. The first page described an irrigation easement, but the language changed deeper in the document. The agreement granted Redthorn Estate permanent access to the wells, underground lines, roads, and water rights attached to her entire property. Another section allowed the company to use the land as collateral for existing and future debts. The agreement could not be cancelled without permission from Redthorn Estate and its lenders. It was not a request to bury one pipe. It was a surrender of everything her father had protected. Callie read the final paragraph twice before closing the folder. "This gives your company control of my farm," she said, "and it lets you mortgage property you don't own." Sienna's pleasant expression disappeared. While Blythe's fingers tightened around her glass, Blythe told her not to be dramatic. The documents had been prepared by experienced attorneys, and the land would remain in Callie's name. Callie answered that a name on a deed meant little if another company controlled the water. Access. and borrowing rights. She asked why the agreement referenced a loan that had already been issued 6 months earlier. For the first time, Gavin looked startled. He reached for the folder, but Callie kept her hand on it. Blythe rose from behind the desk and said Redthorn Estate had supported Callie long enough. The family had given her a respected last name, introduced her to influential people, and allowed her little insect hobby to remain beside one of Washington's most valuable vineyards. Now it was time for Callie to show gratitude. My farm paid for itself before I ever met Gavin. Callie said, I've never taken money from you. Blythe laughed and reminded her that Gavin's income covered their home, cars, vacations, and Eli's education. Callie corrected her. She and Gavin lived in the farmhouse. Her father left her. She drove a 9-year-old truck, and she paid the household expenses whenever the vineyard delayed Gavin's salary. The truth visibly annoyed him. He stepped between the women and urged Callie to sign off-go, promising they could discuss the details later. When she asked whether he had read the document, he avoided her eyes. That hesitation hurt more than Blythe's insults. Callie realized her husband had not brought her into the study to protect her from a bad agreement. He had brought her there to help his mother pressure her into accepting it. A staff member knocked and announced that the guests were ready for the cake ceremony. Blythe took the folder from Callie and said they would finish the conversation in front of the family if necessary. Callie replied that there was nothing left to discuss. As they walked toward the reception hall, Gavin caught his wife by the elbow. His fingers pressed hard enough to hurt. Do you understand what happens if the bank pulls out? He whispered. Hundreds of people could lose their jobs. Callie removed his hand and asked why the survival of a wealthy estate depended on stealing control of 18 acres from his wife. Gavin's jaw tightened. Instead of answering, he told her not to embarrass him in front of the investors. That was the moment Callie understood what he feared most. It was not losing their marriage. It was losing the Redthorn name. The reception hall erupted in applause when Eli entered. At the center of the room stood the enormous designer cake from Seattle, covered in white fondant and edible gold. A sculpted version of the Redthorn Manor sat on top, while 7 candles surrounded the family crest. Blythe guided Eli behind the cake and asked the photographers to move closer. Eli stared at it without smiling. Then he saw Callie carrying her smaller honey cake from the kitchen. His face brightened, and he ran away from his grandmother. That's my birthday cake, he announced, pointing at the tiny fondant beekeeper. Several guests laughed warmly, believing the moment was spontaneous and charming. Blythe did not laugh. She looked at the cameras, then at the wealthy investors standing in the front row, and her expression hardened. Sienna hurried to Callie and whispered that the homemade cake could be served in the kitchen after the official photographs. Callie said Eli had chosen it, and his choice mattered more than the estate's advertising campaign. Gavin stepped forward, speaking through a frozen smile, and told his son to stand beside the expensive cake. Eli refused and wrapped both arms around Callie's waist. Blythe's embarrassment turned to fury. She declared that Callie had taught the boy to disrespect his family. Then, she noticed the folder still in Sienna's hand and addressed Callie loudly enough for the nearest guests to hear. Perhaps this is a good time for you to show everyone how grateful you are, she said. Sienna placed the documents on the birthday table and uncapped a pen. The room gradually fell silent as Callie refused. Blythe began listing everything she believed her family had given the younger woman, from invitations to country club dinners to access to the Redthorn name. Callie replied that none of those things gave Blythe the right to take her father's land. Murmurs moved through the crowd. One of the investors leaned toward another, clearly surprised that a property dispute was being discussed during the celebration. Gavin told Callie to stop, but she opened the folder and held up the agreement. She asked him directly whether he had helped prepare it. He remained silent. Eli looked from his father to his grandmother, frightened by the sudden hostility around him. Callie put the papers back on the table and said she would never sign them. Blythe stepped close enough for Callie to smell champagne on her breath. "Sign those papers, or I'll make sure you leave here with nothing, not even my grandson," she said. Callie answered that Eli was not a piece of property Blythe could claim. The slap came without warning. Pain flashed across Callie's cheek, and the room seemed to tilt around her. Eli cried out and reached for his mother. Blythe shoved him toward Gavin, then seized the homemade cake. "This cheap thing is all you brought into our family," she snapped. Before anyone could intervene, she smashed it into Callie's face. The cake collapsed between her hands, sending frosting across the tablecloth and floor. One of the sugar bees landed on the unsigned contract. Humiliation burned through Callie. But beneath it came something colder and steadier. She heard the guests whispering, Eli sobbing, and Gavin telling his mother that she had gone too far. Though he still did not approach his wife, Callie wiped the frosting from her eyes. Her left cheek throbbed, and honey clung to her eyelashes. She looked first at Gavin, then at Blythe. "You threatened to take my son because I wouldn't give you my land," she said clearly. "You struck me in front of him, and your cameras recorded it." Sienna spun toward the tripod. The red streaming light was still on. She rushed to end the broadcast. But thousands of viewers had already seen what happened. Some guests lowered their phones. Others continued recording. Callie took Eli from Gavin's arms. When Blythe ordered security to stop her, 2 guards exchanged uncertain looks and remained where they were. They had witnessed the assault and understood that Callie was leaving with her own child. Gavin followed her onto the terrace, begging her to wait until the guests departed. He insisted his mother had lost control and would apologize after she calmed down. Callie asked why he had allowed Blythe to threaten her, strike her, and destroy Eli's cake. Gavin said nothing about the slap. Instead, he warned her not to take the folder because it contained confidential company information. Callie handed the papers back to him. "I don't need your copy," she said. "I know exactly what you tried to make me sign." The drive to the bee farm took less than 10 minutes. But Eli cried most of the way. He kept apologizing for choosing Callie's cake. Believing he had caused the fight, Callie pulled over beside a field of wheat, unbuckled her seatbelt, and climbed into the back seat. She held him until his breathing slowed and assured him that none of it was his fault. A child had the right to choose the cake his mother made. An adult had chosen to turn that cake into a weapon. When they finally reached the farmhouse, Callie locked the doors, washed the frosting from her hair, and photographed the swelling on her cheek. Her father had taught her that anger could make a person reckless, but evidence gave anger direction. By evening, the video had spread far beyond the estate's social media page. Clips appeared with captions accusing the Redthorn family of abusing a working mother at her son's birthday. Wedding clients announced cancellations, and former employees began sharing stories about Blythe's behavior. Gavin called 17 times. Sienna sent a prepared statement for Callie to post, claiming the incident had been a private misunderstanding exaggerated online. Callie ignored both of them. She sat at the kitchen table while Eli slept upstairs, listening to the strange emptiness outside. The hives closest to the western fence should have been active in the warm evening air. Yet only a few bees moved near their entrances. A pale residue covered the grass beyond the fence, shimmering beneath the setting sun. "At no patruzech, shitrep. M." A message appeared from an unfamiliar number. The sender identified himself as Amos Reed. The former field manager Blythe had fired the previous fall. He said he had seen the birthday video and knew Callie would now understand what the Redthorns were capable of doing when someone refused to obey them. A second message arrived with a photograph of workers in protective masks loading unmarked chemical drums onto a Redthorn truck. The date in the corner matched the night before Callie's first colony collapsed. Then Amos sent one final warning. Your bees didn't die from disease or bad weather. Gavin knew exactly what was being sprayed. And I can prove who ordered it. Chapter 2. The Price of Staying Silent. Gavin arrived shortly after 7 the next morning and pounded on the farmhouse door hard enough to rattle the glass. Callie had barely slept. She had spent most of the night saving copies of the birthday video, photographing the dead bees, and forwarding Amos Reed's messages to a new email account Gavin could not access. Eli was eating cereal at the kitchen table when the pounding began. His spoon stopped halfway to his mouth, and fear crossed his face. Callie immediately sent him upstairs with his tablet and headphones. Then she walked to the front door, but left the deadbolt engaged. Through the glass, she saw Gavin in yesterday's suit, his tie gone and his hair uncombed. He looked less like the polished heir to Redthorn Estate and more like a man whose carefully protected world had begun to collapse. Open the door. Callie, we need to fix this before it gets worse, he said. Callie asked whether he meant their marriage, his mother's assault, or the live stream damaging the family business. Gavin glanced toward the visible doorbell camera before lowering his voice. He said Blythe had been overwhelmed by financial pressure and had reacted badly. But the incident could still be contained. Sienna had prepared a joint statement saying the cake had slipped during a heated family disagreement. If Callie posted it and appeared beside Blythe for a short interview, the estate would pay for any medical care she needed. Callie stared at him through the glass. Not once did he ask whether she was hurt. He only wanted her to help transform a deliberate assault into an unfortunate accident. Callie unlocked the door, but kept herself between Gavin and the entrance. The bruise on her cheek had darkened overnight, and his eyes settled on it before sliding away. She told him she had saved the full video, including Blythe's threat to take Eli. She had also scheduled an appointment with the county sheriff's office to document the assault. Gavin's face tightened. He reminded her that Blythe was Eli's grandmother and warned that a criminal complaint could permanently damage their family. Callie answered that Eli had watched his grandmother strike his mother and use his birthday cake to humiliate her. The damage had already been done. You stood there, she said. You didn't stop her. You didn't even come to me afterward. You chased me outside because you wanted those papers back. Gavin finally lost the careful tone he used around cameras. He told Callie she was acting as if the farm still belonged entirely to her. According to him, Redthorn Estate had used the property to support a major loan months ago. The bank had accepted the documents, recorded its interest, and released the money. If Callie caused the loan to default, the lender could seize the farmhouse, barns, and hives. For a moment, she wondered whether she had misunderstood him. Then she asked how the bank could accept property she had never pledged. Gavin looked toward the vineyard, instead of answering. You signed what was necessary, he said. Callie felt a chill move through her, despite the morning heat. She told him she had never signed a mortgage, deed of trust, or water agreement connected to Redthorn Estate. You sign things all the time, Gavin replied. He suggested she had forgotten paperwork presented during the previous year's tax preparation. Callie had managed enough of her father's business records to recognize the tactic. He was not explaining what happened, he was trying to make her doubt her own memory. She told him to bring her a complete copy of every document bearing her name. Gavin refused, claiming the loan agreement was confidential. Then he shifted to Eli. If Callie continued behaving unpredictably, he said, Blythe's attorneys could argue that the boy needed a more stable home. The threat was quiet, but unmistakable. Callie stepped back inside and told Gavin that any future discussion about property or custody would take place through attorneys. Then she closed the door and locked it in his face. When the sheriff's deputy arrived later that morning, Callie showed him the video, the photographs of her cheek, and the messages Sienna had sent asking her to describe the assault as an accident. The deputy explained that the report would be forwarded for review and that the video provided independent evidence of what occurred. He also gave Callie information about requesting a protection order if Blythe continued threatening or approaching her. Callie did not exaggerate the incident or demand an immediate arrest. She simply described what happened and asked that every detail be documented. The process felt less dramatic than the confrontations on television. But it gave her something she had not possessed the night before, an official record that the Redthorns could not edit through a public relations statement. By noon, Sienna had begun fighting back. Redthorn Estate released a statement accusing unnamed individuals of circulating a misleading clip from a private family dispute. Sienna then appeared in a local television interview and described Callie as emotionally distressed after the loss of her bee colonies. She suggested that Callie had arrived at the party looking for a confrontation and had intentionally placed a homemade cake beside the professionally prepared one. Social media accounts connected to the estate repeated claims that Callie was demanding millions of dollars from her husband's family. None of it was true. But the accusations spread quickly. Callie's farm page filled with insults from strangers calling her manipulative, ungrateful, and jealous of Blythe's success. Callie wanted to answer every lie. But she forced herself to wait. Instead, she called the Northwest Small Farm Alliance, an organization that had helped her apply for a pollinator habitat grant 2 years earlier. Its legal referral service connected her with Jocelyn Park, an attorney in Walla Walla who specialized in agricultural land, irrigation rights, and disputes between family-owned farms. Jocelyn listened without interrupting as Callie described the birthday party, the document Blythe wanted her to sign, and Gavin's claim that the property had already secured a loan. When Callie finished, Jocelyn asked a single question. Had she ever signed anything in front of a notary concerning her land? Callie answered no. Jocelyn told her not to sign, destroy, alta, or post any document until they reviewed the county records together. Their appointment was scheduled for the following morning. But Callie still had to decide whether she could trust Amos. His name was familiar. He had managed Redthorn's vineyard crews for nearly 12 years before disappearing from the estate the previous fall. Gavin had said Amos was fired for stealing equipment. While Blythe claimed he had developed a drinking problem, Amos's messages suggested a different explanation. He asked Callie to meet him in the parking lot of a farm supply store 20 miles away. She refused to meet alone and told him her friend, local orchard owner Dana Whitaker, would accompany her. Amos agreed without argument, which made Callie slightly less suspicious. Amos arrived in an old pickup with a cracked windshield and Redthorn vineyard dust still embedded in the floor mats. He looked exhausted rather than dangerous. He placed a thick envelope on the hood between them, but kept one hand over it. Before giving Callie anything, he asked whether she understood how far Blythe would go to protect the estate. Callie touched the bruise on her cheek and said she was beginning to understand. Amos explained that Redthorn's grape crop had been threatened by insects and fungal disease after 2 unusually difficult seasons. An approved treatment program would have been expensive and might have required the vineyard to suspend use of its organic label. Blythe chose a cheaper, restricted chemical that was not authorized for the way her crews applied it. According to Amos, workers sprayed at night to avoid inspectors and neighboring farmers. They were instructed to remove labels from the chemical drums and record the applications under the name of an approved product. Amos objected after finding dead birds near the creek and learning that several vineyard employees had developed headaches and breathing problems. He warned Gavin that the spray could drift onto Callie's property and destroy her bees. Gavin's response was preserved in a printed email inside the envelope. If the colonies fail, she may finally accept Mother's offer for the west parcel. Callie read the sentence twice. Gavin had not merely known her bees were in danger. He had viewed their deaths as leverage against his own wife. The envelope also contained work schedules, delivery receipts, photographs of chemical drums, and handwritten notes showing the nights each section of the vineyard had been sprayed. Amos had copied the documents after Blythe ordered him to destroy the originals. When he refused, Sienna accused him of stealing fuel and threatened to call the sheriff unless he signed a resignation agreement. Amos left without signing. But he remained silent because his wife was undergoing cancer treatment and depended on the health insurance he received through a temporary settlement with the estate. She had died 6 weeks earlier. Watching Blythe attack, Callie at the birthday party convinced him that silence was no longer protecting anyone. It was only allowing the Redthorns to choose their next victim. Callie asked why Amos had not gone directly to state regulators. He admitted that some of the records were incomplete and that Blythe would claim he fabricated them out of revenge. He had photographs and schedules, but the most important proof remained inside the estate's chemical storage facility and digital purchasing system. Amos also suspected that drums had been buried near an unused section of vineyard bordering the creek. He warned Callie not to search the estate herself. Trespassing would allow Blythe to change the subject from contamination to Callie's conduct. Callie promised she would use legal channels. Before leaving, Amos gave her a memory card containing the original photographs and instructed her to make several copies immediately. She placed it inside a small metal case and kept it in her pocket. Back at the farmhouse, Callie spread her father's land files across the kitchen table. Wesley Monroe had kept every tax bill, well inspection, seed receipt, and handwritten map in labeled folders. At the bottom of a locked metal box, Callie found an envelope marked water, never release. Inside was a faded document from 1948 granting the property access to a natural aquifer and a creek-fed irrigation channel. Later, agreements recognized those rights as older than the permits held by Redthorn Estate. Callie still did not understand their present value, but she now knew why her father had repeatedly warned her. Blythe did not want 18 acres merely to improve the view. She wanted control of whatever flowed beneath them. That evening, Gavin returned with a stuffed overnight bag for Eli and announced that he was taking their son to the manor. Callie refused to let him enter. Gavin reminded her that he was Eli's father and had equal parental rights. Callie acknowledged that he did, but said Eli was frightened, exhausted, and already asleep. She also told Gavin that moving the boy to the home of the woman who had assaulted his mother in front of him was not in his best interest. Gavin accused her of using Eli as punishment. Callie answered that she was protecting their child from another confrontation. She offered to arrange a daytime visit in a neutral public place. But Gavin rejected it. He wanted control, not time with his son. When Callie mentioned Amos, the anger vanished from Gavin's face and was replaced by fear. He asked exactly what the former manager had given her. Callie did not answer. Gavin said Amos was a liar who had been fired for theft, repeating Blythe's old story, almost word for word. Then he warned that possession of company files could expose Callie to legal action. She told him the documents concerned chemicals that might have contaminated her land and harmed her bees. Gavin's hands began to shake. Though he hid them in his pockets, he insisted the spraying program had been approved by outside consultants. Callie asked why his email said failed colonies might force her to sell. Gavin stared at her for several seconds, then claimed the sentence had been taken out of context. After he left, Callie carried a flashlight to the western fence. The evening was warm, but the familiar hum of insects had nearly disappeared. She knelt beside a hive and found dozens of dead bees scattered across the landing board. Some twitched weakly, unable to fly. Beyond the fence, the grape leaves looked healthy and unnaturally clean. Callie collected samples of soil, grass, water, and dead bees in separate glass jars. Recording the time and location of each one, she photographed the process and asked Dana to witness the labels before sealing them. The next morning, the samples would go to an independent agricultural laboratory. If the red thorns had poisoned her property, she intended to prove it without giving them any opportunity to claim the evidence had been mishandled. Jocelyn met Callie at the county recording office shortly after it opened. She was direct, practical, and unimpressed by the red thorn name. Within 40 minutes, they located a deed of trust recorded against Callie's farm 8 months earlier. The document claimed Callie had pledged the land to secure part of a $4.8 million commercial loan issued to Redthorn Estate. Her signature appeared on the final page. It looked convincing from a distance, but Callie immediately noticed the letter M in Monroe curved the wrong way. Her father had taught her to sign that name with a sharp upward stroke, and she had never changed it. Jocelyn requested certified copies of the entire recording package and warned Callie not to contact the bank until they understood who had submitted it. The notary section raised further questions. It stated that Callie had appeared in person at a Spokane office on October 14 of the previous year. Callie opened the calendar on her phone and found photographs from that exact day. She had been at Eli's school field trip in Walla Walla from morning until late afternoon, surrounded by teachers, parents, and students. Gavin had been absent from the trip because he claimed he was meeting the estate's lenders. Jocelyn explained that the false notarization could invalidate the lien, but proving fraud would require examining the notary journal, identification records, and bank communications. The discovery was serious enough that they could seek an emergency court order preventing any foreclosure or transfer while the signature was investigated. Jocelyn turned to the final attachment and became very still. It was a sworn consent form identifying Gavin as the person who had delivered the signed documents to the bank. Beneath his name, he certified that he had personally witnessed Callie sign them voluntarily and that she understood her property was being pledged for Redthorn Estate's debt. Gavin's signature was unmistakable. The timestamp showed he completed the certification less than an hour after texting Callie from Spokane to say his meeting was running late. Callie looked at the page until the words blurred. Her husband had not simply remained silent while his mother tried to steal her land. He had already helped steal it months before, and now the lie carried his name. Callie continued staring at Gavin's signature until Jocelyn gently pulled the certified document away. The betrayal was no longer a matter of interpretation. Gavin had sworn that he watched his wife sign away her farm when he knew she had been miles away with their son. For months, he had eaten at her table, slept beside her, and listened while she worried about losing her bees. All that time, he knew Redthorn Estate had already borrowed millions against her land. Callie expected herself to cry, but the tears did not come. What she felt was colder than grief. She asked Jocelyn what they could do immediately. The attorney answered that they could challenge the fraudulent lien, notify the lender's fraud department, and ask a judge to prevent any foreclosure or transfer until the signature was investigated. By that afternoon, Jocelyn had filed an emergency civil action on Callie's behalf. She attached photographs from Eli's school field trip, statements from 2 teachers confirming Callie's presence in Walla Walla, and copies of Gavin's sworn certification. The filing did not instantly erase the lien, but it placed the bank and Redthorn Estate on formal notice that the document was disputed. Jocelyn also requested a temporary order blocking the lender from selling or taking control of the property. Callie signed each page in Jocelyn's office, carefully forming the sharp upward stroke in Monroe that was missing from the forged signature. For the first time since the birthday party, she felt she was moving instead of merely absorbing one attack after another. The bank's fraud investigator contacted Jocelyn the next morning. He refused to discuss confidential details, but confirmed that the loan file would be preserved and reviewed. He also requested a handwriting sample and a statement from Callie about her relationship to Redthorn Estate. Jocelyn advised her to cooperate while allowing all communication to pass through the law office. At the same time, Callie submitted Amos's photographs and her sealed soil, water, and bee samples to the Washington State Department of Agriculture. An independent laboratory agreed to perform additional testing. The agencies did not promise immediate action. They explained that pesticide investigations required verified samples, application records, and evidence connecting contamination to a specific source. Callie understood. She did not need anyone to believe her based on emotion. She needed the facts to become impossible to deny. Blythe reacted before the court did. 2 days after the filing, a black SUV stopped outside Jocelyn's office. Blythe entered wearing dark glasses, accompanied by Sienna and an attorney from a Seattle firm. She had refused Jocelyn's invitation to discuss the matter through written correspondence, insisting on a private settlement conference. Callie agreed only if both attorneys remained present. Blythe took a seat across the table and placed a cashier's check in front of her daughter-in-law. The amount printed across it was $500. Ling ling ling. For someone whose business was supposedly thriving, Blythe seemed unusually eager to buy 18 acres of weathered barns and struggling bee colonies. She called the offer generous and warned that it would disappear if Callie continued damaging the family's reputation. The proposed settlement required far more than the sale of the farm. Callie would have to withdraw her complaint against Blythe, state publicly that the birthday incident had been exaggerated, surrender all copies of Amos's records, and agree that Eli's primary residence would be with Gavin until the family crisis ended. Callie read every condition before tearing the cashier's check into 4 pieces. She placed them neatly on top of the settlement agreement. Blythe's attorney stared at her, while Sienna called the gesture childish. Callie answered that using her son as part of a land purchase was worse than childish. "You're asking me to sell my father's farm, my evidence, and my child in one transaction," she said. "There isn't a number large enough." Blythe's composure finally cracked. She accused Callie of believing a few dead insects gave her the right to destroy an enterprise supporting hundreds of employees. Callie reminded her that the estate's workers had also been exposed to the chemicals. Blythe dismissed Amos as a bitter former employee and insisted Gavin's signature had been misunderstood. Jocelyn asked whether Blythe denied that the deed of trust was false. The older woman did not answer directly. She said only that family assets were often reorganized without every spouse understanding the technical details. Callie leaned forward and told her there was nothing technical about forging someone's name. When Blythe left, she paused beside Callie and whispered that people who challenged the Redthorns always discovered how alone they truly were. Jocelyn waited until the door closed before spreading Wesley Monroe's water records across the conference table. She had spent 2 days comparing them with county maps, state certificates, and Redthorn Estate's expansion permits. The oldest document recognized an irrigation right dating back to 1948. Long before the Redthorn Vineyard existed. The right was attached to Callie's property and supplied part of the creek channel, feeding the estate's western reservoirs. Later, agreements allowed Callie's father to share limited seasonal water with neighboring farms. But none granted Redthorn permanent control. Under Washington's priority system, the older right could receive protection before newer users during shortages. Although enforcement would still require review by state authorities, the discovery explained why Redthorn Estate had expanded toward Callie's land. The new hotel, wedding lawns, vineyard blocks, and ornamental ponds required far more water than the estate's existing rights could reliably provide during dry summers. Building permits for the resort relied on projections showing continued access through Callie's parcel. The lender had apparently assumed the forged deed gave Redthorn permanent control over that access. If the lien was invalidated and Callie refused a new agreement, The estate could be forced to reduce irrigation or find another expensive source. Her modest bee farm was not an obstacle beside Blythe's fortune. It was the hidden foundation beneath it. Callie remembered her father arguing with Blythe 6 years earlier, shortly before his health began to fail. At the time, Wesley refused to explain the disagreement, saying only that the Redthorns had begun treating a neighborly favor like ownership. Callie now found a handwritten letter among his records. In it, Wesley informed Blythe that Redthorn Estates' temporary access to the Western Channel would end if the company expanded its commercial operations. He had mailed the letter by certified mail, and the delivery receipt carried Sienna's signature. The family had known for years that their access was limited. Rather than renegotiate honestly, they waited until Wesley died and pressured his daughter. Jocelyn cautioned Callie that owning an older water right did not give her absolute control over every drop in the region. State agencies would still determine its validity, historic use, and present limits. Even so, the documents were strong enough to challenge Redthorn's claims and force an accurate accounting. Callie appreciated the warning. She did not want revenge built on exaggeration. She wanted the truth. Even if it proved less dramatic than people expected, Jocelyn smiled and said, the truth was already dramatic enough. A wealthy estate had forged a beekeeper's signature because its multi-million-dollar expansion depended on land it did not own. The first laboratory results arrived that afternoon. The dead bees contained elevated levels of a restricted pesticide consistent with the products shown in Amos's photographs. Traces of the same chemical appeared in grass and surface water collected near the western fence. The report could not yet prove that Redthorn Estate was the source, but it ruled out disease as the primary cause of the colony collapse. Callie sat alone in her truck reading the findings. She had raised some of those colonies from queens her father selected years earlier. Gavin knew how much they meant to her. He had helped Eli paint the hive boxes and watched Callie work through summer heat to keep them alive. Yet he had allowed them to be poisoned because their deaths made her easier to pressure. Amos called after sunset and asked Callie to meet him at Dana Whitaker's orchard. He arrived carrying a weatherproof trail camera and another memory card. Years earlier, Wesley had used the camera to monitor coyotes near the creek. After noticing chemical drums being moved at night, Amos repositioned it toward an unused service road along the vineyard. The images showed Redthorn trucks traveling toward the creek after midnight. Several photographs captured workers unloading barrels, while a later sequence showed a backhoe digging near an abandoned pump house. The final images were the clearest. Gavin stood beside the truck holding a clipboard while 2 employees rolled unmarked drums down a dirt embankment. Amos explained that he had hidden the camera before being fired. He retrieved it only after the birthday video went viral because he feared Blythe would order the entire area searched. The images did not show the drums being opened, but their dates matched entries in the falsified spray schedules. One photograph also captured a label that appeared identical to the restricted product detected in Callie's bees. Jocelyn instructed them to preserve the original memory card and document its history carefully. She made forensic copies without changing the original files, then arranged to place the camera and card in secure storage. This time, Callie did not keep the only evidence inside her farmhouse. With Jocelyn's help, Callie submitted the new materials to agricultural investigators and the bank. She also notified the county office reviewing Redthorn Estates resort permits that the project's water access was disputed. The consequences were not immediate, but signs of pressure appeared. Trucks stopped working on the unfinished hotel. A construction supervisor told local workers that the lender had delayed the next payment. 3 couples canceled weddings after Sienna refused to answer questions about contamination near the venue. Former vineyard employees began contacting Amos with stories about missing safety equipment, altered work logs, and unexplained illnesses. The empire Blythe had protected through fear was beginning to produce witnesses faster than Sienna could silence them. Gavin requested a meeting at the farmhouse the next evening. Callie agreed only if Dana remained in the kitchen and Jocelyn participated by speakerphone. Gavin looked offended by the precautions. But Callie reminded him that he had threatened her custody and certified a forged signature. He asked whether Amos had shown her the trail camera images. When she did not answer, he said burying old containers was common agricultural practice years ago and claimed the drums might have held harmless material. Callie asked why restricted pesticide was found in her bees. Gavin replied that spray drift could come from any neighboring farm. His explanations arrived too quickly, as if Blythe's attorney had rehearsed them with him. Callie then placed a copy of his email on the table, the message suggesting failed colonies might force her to sell. Gavin stared at it and admitted he knew the vineyard spraying might affect the bees. He claimed he believed the product was legal and the damage would be temporary. When Callie asked whether he had deliberately damaged 2 hives to make the losses appear worse, his silence answered before his words did. Eventually, he confessed that he had ordered a worker to tip over several boxes and blame a black bear. He insisted no bees were supposed to die because the colonies already looked weak. Callie felt sick. Gavin had taken the living things she raised and turned their destruction into a business strategy. He begged her to understand the pressure Blythe placed on him. Redthorn Estate carried more than $18 million in debt. The hotel project was months behind schedule, and the family could lose everything if the bank withdrew. Blythe had promised Gavin control of the company if he secured the western property. He told himself the farm would remain in the family and that Callie would eventually forgive him. Callie asked whether he also expected her to forgive the forged signature, the dead bees, and the threat to take Eli. Gavin said they could still repair their marriage if she stopped listening to Jocelyn and Amos. "You don't want to save our marriage," Callie replied. "You want me to save the estate that you chose over us." Gavin left angry, but not before warning that Amos had made powerful enemies. Callie immediately called him. The first call went to voicemail. So did the second. Dana drove to the small rental house where Amos had been staying. But his pickup was gone and the front door stood partly open. Nothing inside appeared obviously disturbed. Yet his medication remained on the kitchen counter and his dog had been left without food. Jocelyn contacted the sheriff's office and reported the circumstances. The responding deputy said an adult was free to leave voluntarily. But he agreed. The abandoned medication and dog were concerning. Amos's phone stopped transmitting a location shortly after his meeting with Callie. That night, Callie moved Eli into her bedroom and placed the original land documents in a fire-resistant case near the door. Dana offered to stay, but Callie did not want her friend endangered. Before leaving, Dana checked the locks and reminded Callie to call immediately if she saw anything unusual. Around 1 in the morning, Callie awakened to a faint popping sound outside. At first, she thought it was distant thunder. Then, an orange glow flickered across her bedroom wall. She rushed to the window and saw flames climbing the side of the main equipment barn. Less than 100 feet from the farmhouse, the dry wooden roof caught with terrifying speed. Callie dialed 911 while pulling Eli from bed. Smoke rolled across the yard, and frightened bees swarmed around the burning structure. The barn contained protective suits, extraction equipment, farm records, and several recovering colonies she had moved away from the contaminated fence. Callie carried Eli to Dana's house across the road, then returned far enough to release 2 goats trapped in a nearby pen. By the time volunteer firefighters arrived, the roof had collapsed. A propane cylinder exploded inside, sending sparks over the field. Fire crews formed a line between the barn and farmhouse, but no one could save what was already engulfed. Standing beneath the red emergency lights, Callie checked her phone again. Amos still had not responded. Then she noticed a missed voicemail received minutes before the fire began. The recording contained several seconds of wind, A vehicle door slamming, and Amos's strained voice saying, "They found the camera. Don't trust." The message ended abruptly. When Callie called back, an automated recording announced that the number was no longer in service. Behind her, the barn where her father had taught her to harvest honey collapsed into a shower of sparks. By sunrise, the equipment barn had become a blackened frame surrounded by wet ash. Firefighters saved the farmhouse. But Callie lost her extraction machines, protective suits, stored honey, and 12 recovering colonies. Eli sat inside Dana's kitchen wrapped in a blanket, staring through the window at the smoke rising across the road. He had stopped asking when they could return home. Callie remained with the fire investigator while he photographed burn patterns and collected pieces of melted wiring. She told him about the land dispute, the forged signature, Amos's disappearance, and the voicemail received minutes before the blaze. The investigator did not promise that the fire was arson, but he treated the information seriously. He collected Callie's phone as evidence after arranging for its contents to be copied. Blythe released her version of events before the fire department completed its preliminary inspection. Redthorn Estate issued a statement expressing sympathy while suggesting Callie had been under severe financial and emotional pressure. Sienna's statement pointed out that the destroyed barn was insured and claimed several valuable records had supposedly been stored inside. A local news station soon reported that investigators were considering all possible causes, which Sienna's supporters twisted into an accusation that Callie had burned her own property. Online accounts began calling the fire an insurance scheme. Callie recognized the pattern. The Redthorns did not need to prove she was guilty. They only needed to create enough confusion that the public stopped asking who else had a motive. Gavin appeared at Dana's house that afternoon with a sheriff's deputy and a copy of an emergency family court petition. He had asked for temporary primary custody of Eli, claiming Callie kept their son on a property contaminated with chemicals and vulnerable to unexplained fires. His filing described the birthday incident as a disagreement and omitted Blythe's recorded threat. It also claimed Callie was interfering with his parenting time. The deputy explained that Gavin did not have an order allowing him to remove Eli that day. He was there only to prevent a confrontation while delivering the documents. Callie thanked him, accepted the papers, and refused Gavin's demand to speak privately. Eli remained inside with Dana, far from his father's raised voice. "You knew that farm was dangerous, and you kept him there anyway," Gavin said. Callie reminded him that the danger came from chemicals used by his company and a fire set after she uncovered his fraud. Gavin accused her of making claims she could not prove. Then he saw the fire investigator walking across the road and lowered his voice. He offered to withdraw the custody petition if Callie surrendered Amos's evidence and stopped challenging the loan. Callie asked him to repeat the offer in front of the deputy. Gavin immediately denied making it. His desperation told her the evidence was more damaging than she realized. She returned to Dana's house without giving him the argument he wanted. Jocelyn brought in Rachel Dobbins, a family law attorney experienced in high-conflict custody cases. Rachel reviewed the assault video, sheriff's report, fire records, and Gavin's sworn certification of the forged land documents. She explained that courts focused on Eli's safety rather than punishing either parent for the breakdown of a marriage. Callie needed to show that she had responded responsibly to the fire, arranged safe housing, and supported appropriate contact between Eli and his father. Callie agreed to supervise daytime visits at a neutral family center, but she refused to let Gavin take Eli to Redthorn Estate while the contamination investigation remained open. At the emergency hearing 3 days later, Gavin's attorney portrayed him as a concerned father, responding to chaos at his wife's farm. Rachel countered with the complete birthday video, not the shortened clip Sienna circulated. The judge watched Blythe threaten to take Eli. "Strike, Callie," and smashed the cake into her face while Gavin stood nearby. Rachel also presented Gavin's demand that Callie surrender evidence in exchange for dropping the custody petition, which the deputy had partially overheard. The judge declined to remove Eli from Callie's care until the environmental and fire investigations progressed. Gavin's visits would take place at the family center. The ruling did not determine permanent custody, but it prevented Blythe from using the boy as immediate leverage. The fire investigators' first major break came from an unexpected source. A refrigerated delivery truck had been parked outside Dana's orchard overnight because of a mechanical problem. Its company used exterior cameras to monitor cargo and collisions. One camera faced the county road leading to Callie's farm. The footage showed a dark Redthorn Estate utility vehicle passing shortly after midnight with its headlights off. 23 minutes later, the same vehicle returned at high speed. The driver's face was unclear, but a white inventory number on the rear panel identified the vehicle as one assigned to Marcus Vale, the estate's facilities manager. Marcus initially claimed the vehicle had remained at Redthorn Estate all night. Electronic gate records contradicted him, and location data from the truck's fleet system placed it near Callie's barn shortly before the fire. Investigators obtained a warrant to inspect the vehicle and found traces of gasoline on a tarp in the cargo area. A search of Marcus's house uncovered a Redthorn fuel card used at a gas station 40 minutes before the fire. The evidence did not yet show who had ordered him to go there, but it destroyed Sienna's claim that Callie was the only person with an opportunity to start the blaze. The burn analysis found 2 separate ignition points near the barn's rear wall. Neither was close to electrical wiring or machinery capable of creating an accidental spark. The investigator officially classified the fire as intentionally set. Callie's insurance company withdrew its fraud warning and opened the claim under its arson procedure. More importantly, the sheriff's office began treating the case as a criminal investigation. Marcus stopped answering questions and hired an attorney. Blythe publicly insisted that no member of the family had authorized illegal conduct, quietly positioning a longtime employee to absorb the blame. While investigators searched for Amos, Jocelyn received a call from a blocked number. Amos had borrowed a phone at a highway diner nearly 90 miles away. After leaving Callie's farm, he noticed a Redthorn security truck following him. The vehicle forced his pickup onto a dirt shoulder, and Marcus approached demanding the trail camera and memory card. Amos escaped through an orchard on foot, leaving his truck behind. He had tried to call Callie while hiding near an irrigation ditch, but someone knocked the phone from his hand before the message ended. He reached an old hunting cabin belonging to his brother and remained there until he felt safe enough to contact Jocelyn. Jocelyn arranged for Amos to meet investigators at a secure location. He identified Marcus as the man who threatened him and provided a written account of Blythe's orders to destroy application logs. Amos also revealed that the trail camera was not the only evidence he preserved. Months earlier, he had downloaded purchase records from Redthorn's chemical inventory system and mailed a sealed copy to his sister in Idaho. The records showed repeated purchases of a restricted pesticide through a shell distributor. Payment approvals carried Gavin's electronic authorization. While Sienna approved false marketing materials describing the vineyard as environmentally responsible, the news reached Sienna before Callie knew Amos had returned. That evening, Sienna arrived alone at Dana's house. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, and she kept checking the road behind her. Callie would not let her inside, so they spoke on the porch, with Jocelyn listening through Callie's phone. Sienna said Blythe was preparing a defense that blamed Gavin for the chemical purchases and Sienna for the false advertising. Their mother intended to claim she had relied on her adult children and knew nothing about operational decisions. Sienna had discovered draft statements and resignation letters that would remove both siblings from the company before investigators could question the board. Callie asked why Sienna expected sympathy after helping Blythe smear her and plant false stories about the fire. Sienna said she was not asking for sympathy. She was offering evidence. From her bag, she removed a flash drive containing years of internal emails, budget files, and public relations instructions. Several messages came directly from Blythe. One instructed Gavin to make the Western parcel financially unbearable for Callie. Another told Sienna to prepare a narrative describing Amos as unstable if he reported the pesticide use. A third, sent hours after the birthday party, ordered the facilities department to clean every storage location before inspectors start looking. Jocelyn instructed Sienna not to alter or delete anything else and arranged for her attorney to coordinate with investigators. Callie made no promises about protecting her from prosecution. She told Sienna that cooperation did not erase what she had done. Sienna accepted that with a bitterness Callie had never seen in her before. Before leaving, she confessed that Redthorn Estate had less than 6 weeks of operating cash. The hotel expansion was funded through short-term loans tied to the forged interest in Callie's property. If the bank rejected that collateral, the estate would miss payroll and construction payments. Blythe's empire was already collapsing. She had simply hidden the cracks behind parties, wine awards, and expensive advertising. The consequences accelerated after Amos submitted the purchase records. State agricultural officials issued an emergency order suspending pesticide applications across the estate and temporarily halted use of its environmental certification pending further review. County officials restricted access to the Western Creek and began testing nearby wells. The lender froze the remaining hotel construction funds after its internal review found discrepancies in the collateral documents. Contractors removed equipment from the unfinished resort, and more wedding clients canceled their reservations. Vineyard workers demanded independent medical testing and refused to enter fields treated on the disputed dates. Callie did not celebrate. Redthorn Estate employed families who had nothing to do with Blythe's decisions, and a sudden closure could leave them without wages. Through the Small Farm Alliance, she helped connect workers with legal clinics and emergency assistance programs. Her actions surprised some employees who had believed Sienna's claims that she wanted to destroy the business. Callie explained that accountability did not require punishing innocent laborers. If the estate survived, it needed to survive without poisoning workers, stealing land, or hiding behind the Redthorn name. The combined evidence gave investigators enough cause to search specific storage and disposal areas identified by Amos. Early one morning, state environmental officers, sheriff's deputies, and hazardous material crews entered the Western Vineyard with court-authorized warrants. Blythe stood outside the manor with her attorneys, loudly accusing the county of staging a political spectacle. The crews ignored her and moved toward the abandoned pump house, shown in the trail camera images. Ground-penetrating equipment detected several large objects beneath recently disturbed soil. Excavators removed the earth slowly to avoid rupturing anything buried below. The first drum appeared 4 feet underground. Its label had been scraped away, but the metal matched containers shown in Amos's photographs. By sunset, crews had uncovered more than 30 drums, several of them leaking into the surrounding soil. Tests detected the same restricted pesticide found in Callie's bees and creek samples. The environmental officers expanded the controlled area and ordered Redthorn Estate to stop using nearby wells. Blythe's attorney continued, insisting that unknown employees acted without authorization. But the number of containers made that explanation increasingly difficult to believe. Gavin called Callie from the estate as news helicopters circled above the vineyard. His voice shook as he said, Blythe was blaming him for everything. He offered to provide additional records if Callie persuaded investigators that he had cooperated from the beginning. She reminded him that cooperation meant telling the truth, not trading fragments of it whenever he became afraid. Gavin said his mother had controlled him all his life. Callie answered that Blythe's control did not place his signature on forged documents or make him destroy beehives. He had made those choices himself. A week later, Jocelyn received a preliminary laboratory report concerning the buried containers. One of the least corroded drums carried several usable fingerprints beneath its metal rim. Investigators compared them with prints Gavin had voluntarily provided while claiming he never handled the chemicals. The report identified multiple points of correspondence. Gavin had not merely approved purchases from an office or followed his mother's instructions from a distance. He had personally touched a drum later, buried beside the creek, and the evidence now placed his own hands beneath the fortune his family had tried to protect. The fingerprint report did not lead to Gavin's immediate arrest, but it destroyed his claim that he had remained distant from the illegal chemical operation. Investigators obtained warrants for his work computer, company email, and cell phone. Deleted messages recovered from the device showed that he had received photographs of leaking drums months before Callie's bees began dying. Instead of ordering a cleanup, Gavin asked Blythe how quickly the Western parcel might lose its commercial value. Her response was brief, long enough for the bank to take it. Another message instructed Gavin to send Callie's signature sample to a document contractor in Spokane. The evidence connected the pesticide, the forged lien, and the pressure campaign against Callie to the same plan. Bank records completed the chain. Gavin had downloaded Callie's signature from a tax document, sent it to an unlicensed notary, and delivered the forged deed of trust to the lender himself. The $4.8 million loan was transferred directly into Redthorn Estates hotel project, with part of it used to cover earlier debts that Blythe had concealed from investors. The lender's fraud department referred the matter to federal authorities because the false collateral had been used to obtain commercial financing. Investigators also discovered that Sienna's marketing division had continued advertising the vineyard as environmentally responsible after internal tests detected contamination near the creek. 6 weeks after the buried drums were uncovered, state and federal prosecutors announced charges against several members of the Redthorn family and 2 employees. Blythe was accused of directing financial fraud, falsifying environmental records, conspiring to conceal hazardous materials, and attempting to destroy evidence. Gavin faced charges connected to the forged lien, pesticide violation, destruction of Callie's hives, and false statements to investigators. Marcus Vale was charged with setting the barn fire and threatening Amos. Sienna avoided the most serious conspiracy charges because she had surrendered internal emails before being formally accused. But she remained responsible for false reports and efforts to discredit witnesses. News cameras gathered outside Redthorn Estate when deputies arrived to execute the final warrants. Blythe walked down the manor steps in the same ivory suit she had worn at Eli's birthday. Though the confidence that once made guests step aside for her was gone, her attorneys kept her from answering questions. But she stopped when a reporter asked whether she regretted striking Callie. Blythe looked directly into the camera and said her daughter-in-law had orchestrated a campaign to steal the family's property. The accusation sounded weaker now, that hazardous material crews were working behind her and warning signs surrounded the western vineyard. Callie watched the coverage from Dana's kitchen, but felt no satisfaction at seeing Blythe placed inside a sheriff's vehicle. The arrest did not restore the dead colonies, erase Eli's nightmares, or rebuild the barn. It also did not guarantee a conviction. Jocelyn reminded her that criminal cases moved through evidence, hearings, negotiations, and trials, not through public anger. Callie's responsibility was to continue telling the truth and preserve every record. She turned off the television before Eli came downstairs. He did not need to see his grandmother's humiliation replayed the way Callie's had been. The civil court moved faster on the forged deed. A handwriting expert concluded that Callie's signature had been copied and digitally altered. The notary admitted she never met Callie and had accepted money from a contractor working for Gavin. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the bank released its claim against the bee farm and joined the lawsuit, seeking repayment from Redthorn Estate. The judge formally declared the lien invalid. When Jocelyn handed Callie the court order, Callie ran her fingers over her father's name on the original deed. For the first time in nearly a year, no Linda, Redthorn attorney, or forged documents stood between her and the land Wesley had protected. State water officials completed a separate review of the old irrigation records. They confirmed that Callie's property held a valid senior right, though its exact seasonal use remained subject to regulation and conservation requirements. Redthorn Estate had exceeded its own permitted withdrawals for years and concealed the shortage by diverting water through the Western Channel. The unfinished resort could not legally operate at its proposed capacity, even without the criminal charges. The hotel expansion had been built on water. The Redthorns did not control and collateral. They did not own. The estate's board removed Blythe and Gavin from every management position. A court-appointed receiver took control of the company after the bank declared the loans in default. Weddings were relocated. Wine production was suspended. And contaminated vineyard blocks were closed. Environmental engineers estimated that removing the buried drums, treating the soil, and monitoring the groundwater would cost millions of dollars. The manor, tasting rooms, construction site, and most of the vineyard were placed on the market. Part of any sale proceeds would be reserved for cleanup. Employee wages, lenders, and residents whose wells had been affected. Many workers feared Callie wanted the estate completely destroyed. She surprised them by supporting a plan that allowed uncontaminated sections of the vineyard to continue operating under independent management. Through the Northwest Small Farm Alliance, she helped create an emergency fund for seasonal workers who had lost hours. She also connected affected families with attorneys and medical screening programs. Amos joined the worker committee after doctors confirmed that his long-term headaches were consistent with repeated pesticide exposure. For the first time, employees who had been afraid to question Blythe could speak without losing their jobs. Sienna entered a cooperation agreement with prosecutors. She provided access to archived servers, identified the people who had altered environmental reports, and testified that Blythe personally approved the campaign portraying Callie as unstable. Her cooperation reduced the charges, but it did not save her career. She lost her executive position, received probation and community service after pleading guilty to submitting false business records, and was barred from serving as an officer of the reorganized company. During her testimony, Sienna admitted she had known the birthday statement was false. She had watched the live stream. I seen her mother strike Callie, and still tried to turn the victim into the aggressor. Marcus eventually admitted setting the barn fire. He told investigators Blythe summoned him to the manor hours after Amos's evidence reached regulators. She ordered him to remove anything connecting the estate to the trail camera and described Callie's barn as the place where the records would probably be stored. Marcus claimed he intended only to frighten her. But he brought gasoline, ignited 2 separate areas, and fled with his headlights off. He also admitted following Amos and forcing his truck off the road. Fleet data, gas station records, and the delivery truck's camera supported every major part of his confession. Blythe requested a private meeting with Callie shortly before entering her plea. Jocelyn advised that Callie had no obligation to attend, but she agreed to a controlled conversation at the courthouse with attorneys present. Blythe looked smaller without the manor, employees, and family crests surrounding her. She asked Callie to withdraw the assault complaint and soften her victim statement. In return, she offered to abandon any future claim to seeing Eli and promised not to contest Callie's ownership of the farm. Callie reminded her that the land was already hers and that Eli was not something Blythe could exchange for mercy. I built that estate for my children, Blythe said. Everything I did was to keep the family from losing what belonged to us. Callie answered that Redthorn Estate had never owned her father's land. Her signature, her base, or her silence. Blythe had confused control with ownership for so long that she no longer recognized the difference. When Blythe insisted the birthday slap was one moment of anger, Callie agreed. One slap had not caused the family's collapse. The forged documents, poisoned water, buried chemicals, ruined hives, threatened witnesses, and burning barn had done that. The cake merely allowed the world to see what the Redthorns did when someone refused to obey. Gavin asked to speak with Callie after accepting a plea agreement. They met at Rachel Dobbins' office, separated by a conference table. Gavin apologized for choosing the estate over their marriage and claimed he had spent his entire life trying to earn Blythe's approval. He said he never expected anyone to be physically harmed and believed he could restore the farm after the hotel became profitable. Callie listened without interrupting. Then she asked whether he would have confessed if the trail camera images and fingerprints had never been found. Gavin could not answer. His silence told her the apology came from defeat, not courage. He begged her not to end their marriage before he began serving his sentence. Gavin said losing Callie and Eli felt worse than losing Redthorn Estate. Callie told him that he lost them when he watched Blythe strike her and worried more about the documents than his wife. Even then, he might have chosen honesty. Instead, he threatened custody, defended the forged lien, and tried to make her surrender evidence. "I don't hate you," Callie said, "but I will never teach Eli that love requires him to remain beside someone who betrays him." She removed her wedding ring and placed it on the table. The divorce was finalized several months later. Callie received primary custody, while the parenting plan allowed Gavin monitored letters and future supervised contact after he completed required counseling and satisfied the conditions of his sentence. Callie did not tell Eli that his father was a monster. She explained that Gavin had made serious choices that hurt people and now had to accept the consequences. Eli was allowed to love his father without being asked to excuse what he had done. Rachel told Callie that protecting a child did not require erasing the child's feelings. It required giving those feelings a safe place to exist. At the sentencing hearings, Amos described being threatened and driven off the road. Vineyard workers spoke about illnesses they had been afraid to report. Callie explained how the contaminated spray destroyed colonies her father had spent years developing and how Eli still became anxious whenever he saw a birthday cake. Marcus received a prison sentence after pleading guilty to arson and witness intimidation. Gavin received a shorter sentence in exchange for admitting the bank fraud, environmental violations, and destruction of property. Blythe received the longest sentence because prosecutors proved she directed the broader scheme and attempted to eliminate evidence after the investigation began. The judge asked Callie how the most important documents survived the fire. Blythe turned toward her for the first time during the hearing. Callie explained that Amos had warned her from the beginning never to keep a single copy of anything. Before the barn burned, she had duplicated the photographs, application logs, water records, and message. Jocelyn held encrypted copies. Another set had been delivered to investigators, and a third was stored outside the county. The barn fire destroyed equipment and living colonies, but it could never destroy the case. Blythe's attempt to erase the evidence had only created proof of arson and obstruction. The court-supervised sale of Redthorn Estate took place the following spring. The manor and wedding venue were purchased by a regional hospitality company, while local growers acquired several uncontaminated vineyard parcels. The unfinished hotel was reduced in size and redesigned around lawful water limits. The Redthorn name was removed from the entrance. Cleanup funds were placed under independent supervision, and affected households received compensation for testing and damaged wells. Blythe's personal assets, including the manor furnishings and valuable wine collection, were sold to satisfy part of the judgments. Callie did not use the Redthorns' collapse to become wealthy. Insurance proceeds rebuilt her barn, while civil compensation replaced equipment and funded the restoration of her soil. She worked with Amos, Dana, and other small farmers to establish the Blue Meadow Cooperative, which offered shared equipment, legal referrals, and independent pesticide testing. Several former Redthorn employees joined the cooperative. Callie also planted a wide buffer of native flowers along the western fence, so future colonies would have a protected place to forage. The first season was difficult, but new queens arrived in spring, and the sound of bees gradually returned to the fields. On Eli's 8th birthday, there were no investors, reporters, crystal glasses, or banners carrying a wealthy family crest. Dana hung yellow paper lanterns between the rebuilt barn and the farmhouse. Amos brought a wooden hive box he had painted with Eli's name, while children from neighboring farms chased one another through the wildflowers. Callie and Eli spent the morning making another honey cake shaped like a beehive. It leaned slightly to one side, and 2 fondant bees lost their wings. But Eli declared it perfect. Before blowing out the candles, Eli looked at his mother and asked whether anyone could take this cake away from them. Callie placed an arm around his shoulders and told him no. The cake belonged to everyone they had chosen to share it with. Eli closed his eyes, made a wish, and blew out all 8 candles. Applause rose around the table as bees moved lazily through the flowers behind him. Callie realized that her son no longer looked toward the road expecting Gavin or Blythe to appear. He was surrounded by people who understood that family was built through protection and respect, not fear. Redthorn Estate had seemed indestructible when Blythe raised her hand at the birthday party. She possessed money, lawyers, employees, and a name recognized across the region. Callie possessed a small farm, a dying group of bees, and the refusal to sign away what was hers. In the end, that refusal exposed everything the Redthorns had buried beneath their fortune. They did not lose their empire because Callie sought revenge. They lost it because every lie required another crime. And every crime left evidence someone courageous was willing to preserve.